Jeff's mic's right in front of my face. All right, welcome everyone. I'm Nate Adams, and you may notice I've got a different background. Lean in, Jeff. So I'm at Jeff's house visiting. Jeff Howard here in Indianapolis. I'm here to pick up a camper if it ends up working out. I just found out earlier that he's like, oh, that one. Yeah, I don't have that one in stock. So it's going to be an interesting day or two. But we are here tonight to discuss more about how do we actually improve average HVAC installs for residential equipment. We've talked about it for a couple of weeks and just kind of bounced around, but we haven't really dove into what might it actually look like. You know, what can we do that really matters? So we're going to dive into some thoughts on that, and then we'll have a nice round robin with all of us. So, and also here we got TK, Mr. Ted Kidd, here to bark at us as needed. We got Mr. Reedy Ward in North Carolina, Tanner suited up down in Alabama. I think something might be about to go down.
Stay strapped to get clapped. That's what George Washington said.
And then we got Ken, who is also a super amazing guy with a serious sense of humor, who plays in multiple bands. So never discount Ken. You never know what's going to come from him. So anyway.
And Abby?
Oh, shoot. I totally forgot Abby. How did I do that? That's our Canadian.
Because he doesn't have his camera going.
It's because he's Canadian.
Yeah.
And he's Canadian, yeah.
Sorry.
Did you hear that, Avi?
Abby's up in Winnipeg, and he is our token Canadian and kind of policy guy. So we've been friends for years, and he helps us out with a bunch of stuff. So anyway, moving forward, how to improve installs. And so last week we talked about standards, and we came to the conclusion, and maybe you came to the conclusion too, that standards aren't going to move the market. We looked at the new ACCA 310, right?
Yeah.
In particular, and it's like it's probably going to be like 1% of new homes, which are 1% of homes. There's about 1 million new homes built every year and 100 million existing homes. So it's extremely unlikely that that's going to be enough to tip the entire industry. It gets so geeky that even all of us geeks here are like, well, that's kind of silly. That's not a good thing.
And who's going to do it?
I'm not.
Yeah, me neither.
Well, we've had the other 14 standards have been out there for years. Nobody's doing them. I start now.
Right? Yeah. So to anybody who's listening on audio,
maybe if we make the standards more complicated, eventually people will adopt them.
Complicated and difficult to hit. Let's do that. But then let's leave out key things, like testing for duct leakage to outdoors, which is what you really care about at the end of the day. It's we're
doing sizing that has infiltration as part of it. It has infiltration.
Who needs that? Or checking energy use, because if you don't true to energy use, you routinely double your man-J for your heat load. It's amazing how often you can take an 80K heat load and make it 40 by looking at what the house used in the past. There's all these parts that make it challenging. But I do love this cartoon. With situation, there are 14 competing standards, and a couple people are like, 14, ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use cases. Yeah. Soon, situation, there are 15 competing standards. This is generally what happens. And I think I talked about it last week, and we'll get to it a little bit later. There's a book that I really came to love that really messed with my head, and I really enjoyed it. And it surprised me that I would like it so well. But it's called The Checklist Manifesto. And it's about checking some just basic things. So like pilots run a checklist so they don't miss something stupid and die, because missing things in an airplane can be a problem. But because you're running through a checklist and going through some basic things, it frees your mind up to think about the more complicated things. So checklists aren't necessarily for dumb people. They're for smart people, and they help you do your job better. So that's part of what we're going to be having a discussion about tonight. But that fellow was in the basement of a building in Switzerland. I forget what medical organization it was, but he's like, what are all these pallets of books? Oh, that's the new standard. Well, how long have those been here? 3 years. Just pallets and pallets of books. And who's going to read it? Like, there's this mixture of, you need to have good technical information and decent technical understanding, but that oftentimes is secondary to understanding why. And also, you got to sell the project in a way that's actually useful. So, I mean, Jeff just pulled off a stunt today. We'll tell more about the story here soon, but he just bumped a free quote job from 17 or 18,000, which was already pretty good. No, it was pushing 19 or something, wasn't it?
18.6.
18.6. Yeah. And now what is it?
27.5.
Added a duct system, free quote, and an electrification.
And electrification, yeah.
Yeah, full electrification.
Slowed it down. Let the guy think about it.
Yeah, and he got there.
Let it cook.
It's crazy that he did that, but that's going to have a really good install, but it took some extra details. But because the client understood why things were going on and what different systems did, all of a sudden he worked himself up. And we have to do the similar thing on the technician side, so that people are just coming along and they understand we aren't doing this just to say that we're doing this. There's a reason, and this makes experiences better. But otherwise, you end up with standards that are just books sitting around. Well, actually, Jeff's got a bunch there. And I mean, they're good for references, but most people aren't going to start off learning that. And so that's the challenge. And then just to repeat what we'd looked at before, these are numbers that Jim Bergman was kind enough to give me coming out of Measure Quick. These are real world duct pressures, as we call it, or external static pressure, but we call it duct pressure for homeowners because it's easier to explain. And so as we all know, like over half an inch is not great. Look, half an inch is somewhere around here. So 70% of systems are above half an inch, which is your typical manufacturer spec. 47% of the systems in this data set, which was pretty nationally representative, 47% were above 0.7, which is where your risk of early failure begins. Doesn't mean it's going to fail early, but it could. That's where the risk begins. And this is just one metric where 70% of systems are out of spec. And overall, Jim, and actually he gave his data, I think, to NIST, one of the national laboratories, and they found that it was like 92 or 93% of residential HVAC systems have a detectable fault.
Can we stop here for a second?
Yeah.
So if a big part of why residential HVAC installs suck is external static pressure on the ductwork, and everybody's guessing or hoping or just burying their head in the sand, pretending that this isn't a problem. How about if we instead acknowledge that this is a problem, offer to the homeowner the information that this is a problem, and that a very simple measurement will help them understand if they're at risk, just like taking your blood pressure. And if they decline having the cuff put on their arm, you document that they declined putting the cuff on their arm, and you move forward. I mean, to me, this is such a
simple thing.
Huge. Well, it's a huge problem looking at this chart.
Yeah.
And it's a problem that the HVAC contractors are responsible for if they don't actively shift the responsibility. HVAC guys, you sell these systems and they're wrong, and it's your fault because the homeowner doesn't know better.
Yeah.
And they haven't been given the opportunity to know better, and they haven't been given the opportunity to understand what their measurement is. All you have to do is give them those two opportunities. And if they decline both of them, then if they end up being on the right side of the red line, not your problem, not your circus, not your monkeys. So to me, this right here is like, why would you assume responsibility for this. If you assume responsibility for this, everybody on the right side of that red line, you have harmed those homeowners. There's no avoiding it. You've harmed them because you know better, or you should. You're the one that's the professional in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the information they need the same way your doctor would give you the information you need. Look, you got to stop eating so much sugar. Cut out the diet soda. Like your sugar is too high and you're at risk of diabetes. 5 years later, you got diabetes. Guess what the doctor says? Yeah, you never cut out the sodas, right? I mean, it's not the doctor's fault. You're diabetic.
But I wanted to take over for Wilford Brimley.
Sorry, go ahead.
So who are you talking to, Ted? You talking to a salesperson in the HVAC industry? You talking to a technician, an installer?
I think I'm talking to. Yeah, I'm talking to management. I'm talking to sales management. I'm talking to the techs who are out there as the equipment is reaching end of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking to the service department, because a lot of times the service, I mean, if you're a company that isn't in the process of eviscerating your service department's goodwill by turning them into salespeople, that service person is the trusted HVAC person in the house.
Yeah, that's one of the few contractors that actually carries a fair amount of trust.
So what you're saying is like going to the doctor and they check your blood pressure every time. That's what any HVAC person going into a home should do as well, or at least offer.
I think everybody up and down the line, for your question, everybody up and down the line holds some responsibility here. If there's
you don't responsibly avoid it.
If it's a tech, well, if you don't know how to do static pressure, you're incompetent. Really, quit. Go you're dangerous, get out of it. But or learn.
You just insulted 80% of the workforce right there.
Gosh, that's really scary, isn't it?
I'm sorry. I think of that meme of it's Bobby holding the paper up, and like, if those kids could read, they'd be really upset.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I'm not a technician, and I can take static pressure.
Yeah.
I've got some concept of where I punch holes. I don't do it every day, so it makes me nervous. But I mean, it's not that hard.
No, and salespeople may not be into this to checking static pressure business, but they can definitely educate about static pressure and recommend that static pressure be taken. And a lot of salespeople can go in the basement and say, that 5-ton system looks like it's on 2 ton of ductwork. It'd be a really good idea to check the static before you decide on your replacement equipment.
So yeah, this is one of the key metrics in our mind for offering, and then just learning how to check. And it's not that hard. And then the other curse is, like, the system we went to look at today had a PSC blower and went to an EC blower. And Jeff's found consistently you get about a 30% bump when you switch from one technology to the other. So that system, what was the static before?
0.91 prior to the like-for-like replacement.
Yeah.
And 0.81 today. So just by installing it, by doing minimal modifications,
you just put it on a platform, basically, right?
Yeah. Didn't increase it; it actually lowered it.
Yeah, it was a downflow system, which in Indy. Well, how common are downflows here? I've seen
on older homes, pretty common.
Okay, I very seldom see them.
Yeah,
but if he hadn't at least done a few of the minor modifications they did, and this was a like for like, so you're limited what you can do, it would have gone from 0.9 to 1.1, 1.2, something like that. And instead it's at 0.8, which isn't fantastic, but it may die early, it may not. I mean, it's tough to know, but
the homeowner was offered.
Yep, exactly. Signed off. Yep. And well, he took it, didn't he? Did he take static pressure?
Yeah, we took it initially. Yep.
Yeah.
When I went out there, wanted me to do it, and he knew what he was getting into, and I said, "Hey, we'll just do what we can."
Yeah. Worst case scenario, you can probably turn the airflow down a hair more. But
He basically said, "I love Coca-Cola, and I'm going to cut back from 3 cases a week to 2."
Okay.
That's not, okay.
Yeah.
That's not up to Jeff to tell him he's making a mistake.
Are those your circus or monkeys?
Nope.
Not anymore. They might have been if you aren't careful. But yeah, this is a really critical thing. Understanding your duct pressure is really key. And note in the green here, I adjusted this. So normally you hear a 0.5 as being like that's good if you're at 0.5 or under. We view 0.3 down to 0.08 as being the good. And it's surprising how consistently you get into that range when you downsize systems. Although with 3 quotes, that's a sticky situation. But you can show people where their likely load range might be, but it's tough to give them a load. But anyway, note how low we like to see systems. And one of my systems runs 0.13 all in. That's total external static. Across the filter is 0.03. So it can be done. And another piece we really haven't dug into is there are about 14 million residential HVAC units a year installed. So obviously a lot of these are going to be pairings, but there's about 4 million furnaces, 6 million ACs, and 4 million heat pumps. Some are going to be hybrid, some are going to be furnace and AC, some are going to be air handler. This is everything. But what that works out to is every 6 seconds, a new install starts up. And if the vast majority of these are bad, if we do a handful of good installs, doesn't matter. Not really. I mean, this is actually where Ted and I started marching down this whole path that we're on. It started off with how can we get it where any homeowner that wants one can have a truly comfortable and healthy place to live. And we come from the home performance side, so we understand our shell side pretty well. But there isn't enough industry there to do a significant enough number of homes for it to matter. It just doesn't matter. I could do 10 or 20, maybe 25 projects a year. That's all I had capacity for. That's not going to change anything. So if we're going to change something, we need to deal with some significant portion, or at least figure out how to deal with some significant portion of those systems that are installed every 6 seconds. So that's the challenge, and that's a really, really big lift. So if you've watched the show before, we are a big fan of the S curve, or it's called the sigmoid curve. And you can look at this as a whole bunch of different ways. I've got this one set up as odds of results. But if you want to have high odds of something happening, you want to do enough work that you can get close to where doing more work on this top part of the curve starts going from vertical or near vertical to tailing out to be horizontal. This is where you want to aim for. The curse is a lot of stuff out there, like standards in particular. It's almost low-hanging fruit thinking, oh, well, we're going to do this, and this is going to make a difference. But the fact of the matter is there's not enough volume there to matter. There just isn't. So this is the real challenge, is how do we do good work at high volume? And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy lift. But one of the key pieces we just touched on is static pressure. So the sweet spot in this case looks like selling a crap ton of well-installed units.
There's some comments in there about static pressure before we move.
Yeah, let's take a look here. They're going to pop up. So yeah, there we are, just repeating kind of what Jeff was saying. Static pressure goes up typically when you switch from PSC to variable speed, or CFM-controlled ECM units, because you gain airflow. And that may or may not be necessary for like system, but it's funny how many systems ran for years with PSCs and ran well low on the CFM per ton numbers. You get a nice icy cold coil if you don't get enough airflow through that thing, and then the ECM comes in and it's like, rah, 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 we're going to push that through there, and then they're going to give up. Ted, I see you putting your own comment up, so that cracks me up. In the pursuit of efficiency, the equipment has been made more and more fragile if run outside of specifications. That's absolutely correct. I view old PSCs like a linebacker. this big 300-pound dude he's muscular, but he's also fat. But if you throw another 300-pound dude on his back, he keeps running down the field just a little slower. Where the ECMs are much more like a prima donna soccer player, where you touch them on the shoulder and they fall over writhing on the floor like you just tried to kill them. So yeah, we've moved, and I mean, just moving from one refrigerant to another, R22, what, 75 to 150 psi, something like that.
Increase, yeah.
Yeah, or somewhere in that range. Well, now we run like 150 to like 250 with 410, and then we now run thinner metal to boot, so we have higher pressures in thinner metal. That's not a recipe for success, but that's all chasing efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. That goes back to the efficiency. What manufacturers want, so or EPA, DOE wants, right? So they got to abide by it. So this is where airflow is going to become more and more important moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and we sized cooling, like we were just saying, right? But what's the higher airflow now between cooling and heating?
Yeah, that's something else that a lot of contractors don't know, is that we used to size ductwork to cooling, and now it's heating has more CFM to reach their efficiency. So we need to start sizing or looking at what's going to be the most.
So a lot of this goes back to efficiency standards, which we talked about a month ago or so, that can ironically get in the way of a lot of things. So a lot of the stuff that we have to think about now and these bad installs, we got away with these bad installs for decades because the equipment didn't care. And if you ran too low of airflow, as long as the coil didn't freeze too often, who cares? Doesn't really matter. And the heat exchangers were nearly bulletproof. So we didn't lose system like we do. Let's see here. Depends on what piece of equipment it's rated at. If it's a furnace, usually 1/2 inch. Air handler, oftentimes 0.3. So yeah, that's good.
Well, I'd also go and say that we say 0.5. They say that's the max. Actually, if you look at what it's rated for, it says 0.15, 0.12, 0.2. Mm-hmm. So that's why we kind of have the chart where we do.
Yep. Well, in this comment, yep, teach them. Like that's the ideal thing, but we have this balance. Like if you work for a big company that pushes you hard to do 2 installs a day, what are the odds of that install being good? Did you vacuum it down?
You didn't have any control over what was specified.
Yeah,
that 5-ton unit that you were told to install on 2.5 ton of ductwork. It's too late. There's no teaching that can happen at that point. You're the installer, not the salesperson, not the designer. You know,
there's so many intertwined challenges here, but the sales side absolutely has to be done correctly, or none of this matters. You put in a system that's too big, or I mean, if you go from an old 80K furnace to a new 80K furnace, which is now actually more than 80K, because if you go from like a 80,000 to a 95 or something like that, or 80% to a 95, it's more output. But also, like Jeff was saying, there's higher airflow requirements. So that is not truly a like for like. There is no like for like in a lot of cases. So it's really challenging. How do we deal with all this stuff? But in the end, we can whine and complain as much as we want. But if we aren't selling a crap ton of well-installed systems, we are not solving for this point here. So, I mean, my view is, say, 90% of systems are mediocre or bad. So like C or less, and maybe 10% are excellent. How do we flip those numbers? Or flipping the numbers realistically isn't going to be possible, but what if we can get to 50-50 good versus mediocre bad? What does it take to do that? Because the industry, we're not going to fix the whole thing. There's no freaking way. There's too many things going on. Trucking the trucks are always going to be around. We can complain about it, but everybody here started as one. For the most part. I did it in the installation side. I didn't know what I was doing. I priced things too low. That's how people begin, and there's demand for that. And a lot of those installs are going to suck. Some of them are actually okay. Guy I use in West Virginia, he doesn't charge enough, but he does good work. So he may be a chuck in a truck, but not how you would necessarily look at it. So if we're going to teach a lot of people, like one thing we need, this is a word that I learned a couple of years ago, and you may or may not know it. It's called heuristics, and it's mental shortcuts for things. So like all of us, when we go out and we look at projects and problems, we have our heuristics, like our standard things that we look at. Like I'm finally about to put out the dumb air sealing course, but I have heuristics for different types of houses. Like if you go to look at a split level house, it's going to have a few really common issues. They're going to have the bump outs of the cantilevers on the front and rear of the top part of the house, which usually has the bedrooms in it. And those usually have cold floors. So I look to see if they have those and how I'm going to deal with them. And in between the different sections of the house, there's usually a chase where the plumbing lines and electric lines are running, sometimes the flue. And you have to find that and seal that because that's oftentimes 20, 30, 40% of the leakage of the house. So that's a heuristic for me. I go up to a split level and I'm like, all right, where's the chase between the sections, and does it have cantilevers or not? So that's just one example from the shell side. So in HVAC, I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind for you, but I mean, static pressure is a heuristic to a large extent.
Yeah, we're going to change that to duct pressure too, probably.
Yeah.
In talking to the homeowner.
Exactly. We talk about duct pressure, but that's a heuristic because if you've got a low duct pressure, the odds are pretty good that system is running fairly happily. You don't know if it was evacuated well or nitrogen was flowed, things like that, but you at least have an idea that system's relatively happy. So that's a heuristic. If you measure a system and it's really high, there's probably something to fix. If it's low, you're probably okay.
Nate, I think it might be worth making the distinction between what a heuristic is and what a rule of thumb is. Heuristics are I guess diagnostic questions you would ask, or just they're like a search path, right? So you're confronted with a complex problem, you don't know where to begin. You use a couple of little investigative techniques to narrow down a search path that helps you, like break down the complex system into something that is easily manageable. Versus a rule of thumb is just, you get a 4-ton, you get a 4-ton. If the rules of thumbs are like just shortcuts that people take from doing good design. And so it might be worth making a distinction between what a heuristic is and what a rule of
that's
thumb
really
is.
key. Yeah, it's like triage.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a really critical point. I mean, the HVAC 2.0 system has a lot of triage in it. You take 100 homes, and 70 of them are going to get free quotes because they don't have significant problems. 30 of them, or 10 or whatever it works out to be, do a comfort consult because they're screwed up and they need more testing. So we're trying to triage homes and projects as we go. And I mean, the same sort of thing happens here. I mean, if you get a 0.9 duct pressure reading, that's an indication in triage that patient needs help, whatever that might look like. So you want to at least try and slow down, or you offer to the client, because not everybody's going to care, and that's fine. Okay, sign here. But if you are asked to do duct pressure testing, when you test it, that's a heuristic. That gives you an idea of which way do you go. But yeah, it's definitely much beyond a rule of thumb, because a rule of thumb is not always great science.
A good analogy or an example to compare the two is a rule of thumb is beer can cold. Grab the suction line. Is it cold? Okay, everything's good. To where a heuristic would be, you grab the suction line to feel if it's cold, and then maybe you stick your hand above the condenser to feel if there's hot air coming out. You're not determining anything concrete, but it's like a baseline. If you grab the suction line and it's hot, and this is a no cooling call, well, you immediately know, okay, well, that gives you a lot of pointers. So it's like a small direction of you're kind of looking at, is this an electrical issue? Is this a refrigeration issue? Blah, blah, blah.
In the rule of thumb, I always tell people, go ahead and cut your thumbs off. I'm not worried about your rule of thumbs. we don't need them. Or, blow them off in Tanner's case there.
I'm going to send you an M80.
Oh, please do. I would love one.
Or 10. You'll get the neighbor's attention.
I've always got the neighbor's attention.
So there's a good comment here. I think front loading from Jordan Davis, by the way, the homeowners, before you show up with attachments in an email that explain the importance of duct sizing, load matching, manual DSJ, and static pressure helps out a lot. Yes, education is critical. The tricky part is can you make it short enough and good enough that some significant portion of people actually look through it? Because oftentimes people don't. And
yeah,
that's
if you
the balance of-
overload, you're not shifting responsibility to the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we've been down this path for years and years and years. And one of the things that we found is that the less you load onto the homeowner, the more responsibility they have for not looking at it.
Yep.
And that's why we have the 6 functions video, which is about 5 minutes long, and the 70-second duct pressure video. Those two are so short that if they haven't looked at them when you get to the house, you can pull out your iPad and say, well, do you mind if we look at it together?
Yeah, and a key thing of if you're putting something like this together yourself is like what he said, you don't want to overload them, because you got to think the main objective should be to deliver good results and to have the homeowner be like, wow, this was a great process, regardless of, you know, how many steps it goes through. If you just throw a ton of information at them, and then when something doesn't go right, go, well, yes, because you didn't read this or you didn't do that, they're going to feel like, oh, well, you just gave me a ton of stuff knowing I'm not going to really see every detail, and then use it as loopholes to get out of not doing your job right. To where if you keep it lean and it's easy to digest, it's easy to understand, and then it's missed, they're not going to feel that way if they choose to do something that is not a good option.
Yeah.
Well, even if they, miss it or whatever, it can still be lean if you don't offer, hey, did you do that? Did you read it? Did you watch it? Whatever. Or, hey, would you want to look at it together? Like Ted said.
Ours is a process that actually documents each of these steps so that for the homeowners like the one Jeff was talking about today, where they were able to drop the static pressure a little bit, but it's still, above manufacturer specification, that homeowner knows that they own that outcome because they were given a lot of chances.
Yep. So that's the key thing. It's a relatively lean information. And like those two videos together, they're 5.5 minutes. Those took me months to actually get scripted and cut down and turned into that. Like there's a crap ton of information because it needs to be accurate and it needs to be at least somewhat interesting to watch, but it needs to be short. And that's a really tough balance. They were very hard to make. But if you send that to them, you can't just send it once. You need to send it multiple times and document it. So if later they're like, but you didn't do that, I'm like, which one of the 3 emails that I sent you did you miss? And I asked you during the free quote, did you watch the video or not? And you said no. And I offered you and you said no. What am I supposed to do?
I got 3 no's from you when trying to help you with this 70-second video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a total of 5.5 minutes of video while you're about to make a $10,000 to $20,000 purchase. Come on, people. But that education and offering it repeatedly and documenting, we think is critical if you're going to what we do responsibly, responsibly avoid responsibility. But all that again is kind of heuristic. The videos in there really are showing a heuristic to consumers. This is a really boiled down but still accurate view of a major thing. And if you want to learn more, you can. But here's something to help you make your decision one way or the other. And I mentioned this earlier, the Checklist Manifesto. I highly recommend at least listening to it. I think I've said in the past, I'm not very good about reading nonfiction. I just never finish them. Part of it is it's usually a 200-page book, but it should be 20. So I make it through the first 50 pages and put them down because I kind of get the gist. But this one was really, really interesting, the Checklist Manifesto, and it may shift how you think about things. It definitely did for me. And like all of us here, we do very complex things every day. But because we've done it often enough, we have it down to basically a checklist in our mind, whether we realize it or not, so that we simplify it. I mean, what's the saying? You don't owe me for the 30 minutes. You owe me for the years that it took me to learn how to do this job in 30 minutes. That's the sort of thing that we're looking at here. But you want to have something that simplifies a lot of the steps so that you can think about the harder stuff and not worry about the easy stuff. And one example of that, I mean, hopefully you've heard me talk about this, that this all started as a joke. So the bad is the big air drop or the big ash drop, which is just a very large return drop that's the same size as the media filter. Again, that's a heuristic. All right. Do you have to worry about what the feet per minute and whatnot is across it? Like, it's nice if you do, but put a 20 by 25 in and make sure that the duct, the return drop is the same size. You'll probably be fine. Is it perfect? No, but you'll probably be fine. And so it started off with a bad big air drop. And then ASS is air source system. Thanks to Eric Kaiser for coming up with that, because I'm not good at thinking of that sort of thing, because this works best with a heat pump system because you can do reheat dehumidification. Because we're going to see more and more moving forward that dehumidification is a problem. But this whole thing is a heuristic. This is a relatively simple system. I think you'd agree. I mean, this is a basic hybrid here, and it's got a humidifier and a fresh air duct and a large filter, and the ducts are oversized. What here is hard at the end of the day? None of this is hard, but this leads to significantly better installs. Would everybody here agree?
Yeah. Don't take things for granted. Don't skip any of those 6 aspects, assuming that they're not needed.
Or at least be sure that you offer them. And speaking of offering, this is out of the HVAC 2.0 free quote process. So there's the 6 functions video, which is, it's like 4 minutes and 3 seconds if memory serves. And it was, like I said, so hard to get it down to be that short and still be accurate and hopefully somewhat interesting. But you educate consumers on various things. Like, do you want a system that matches the load so it puts out what your house needs most of the time? Oh, you want a single stage system? Well, you don't get that. Sorry, because it's wrong 99% of the year or more to what the house needs. Dehumidification. Do you want to keep the house comfortable inside in summertime? Oh, well, I'm sorry, that basic system does a crappy job. And you really don't want that system that IRA is pushing. Like, yeah, you get a $2,000 rebate, but now you get to buy a dehumidifier because the basic systems suck at dehumidification, the cheapest options that qualify for it. But you walk them through all of this, and because they spent 4 minutes watching a video to understand these things, they now understand that they don't really want the basic system anymore. And if they do, and they sign off on it,
okay,
I'll put it in.
Well, the funny thing is, people don't know what they want until after they've experienced it a lot of times.
Yeah.
And it's just like heated seats. Like, before you had heated seats, you were like, who needs that? What?
I said, what's that? What's heated seats?
What's heated seats? Yeah. What are heated seats? And then pretty
you
soon you experience a car with a heated steering wheel. And if you experience that for any length of time, at first you're driving around with a heated steering wheel and you think, oh, this is the dumbest thing ever. And then after a little while, you're like, get in one of your cars that doesn't have it. And you're like, oh, crap.
I miss that. Yeah. So few people actually have experienced good comfort in a home where it's just nice and even. I think back to a client that Ted and I helped. It was a new home. And the guy was coming out of this house that had 2 systems, that it had addition put on, and it had a system added for the back of the house, the addition. It was way oversized. And he's like, it's 10, 15 degrees different all the time. I don't want that. So we did one system in a big old ranch, and it was so even. You could walk from one side of the house to the other, and you could not tell any difference at all, period. And that's what's possible. And Ron is thrilled with how that came out. That was a fun experience. And I'm sure you've heard it. I have too. I can't believe this is the same house. Like, you hear that again and again and again when you get the right system in and the shell's not too screwed up.
Well, the other thing is, if you're using this 6 functions thing, a lot of times you get people that are like, oh, that's why I would want better stuff. Like Reedy, you're running into a lot of people that have very low comfort quiz scores. So they don't have any comfort complaints or very little. And yet they're still buying this 5-stage or inverter-driven stuff, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
why are they doing it?
Well, because they want to feel better. I mean, they may say that they don't have a high pain on their comfort quiz, but the reality of it is that they're just not taking time to think about things in the way that they should long term. And so when we sat down and talked to them a little bit, show them the videos, then what begins to happen is they say, "Oh yeah, you know what? I thought about this. And you think this will work better for me?" And once they start to make that decision, then there you have it.
It's funny how that works. Well, you just sold an electrification out of a free quote and a whole duct system because the guy thought about it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's funny how that works. So much of it too. Well, two things. The first time you're asked a question you've never been asked before, your answer sucks. And the second thing is, if you don't think that something is possible to solve, you push it out of your mind and you don't think about it, or you just aren't even aware. Like the heated seats or the heating steering wheel. I haven't had a heated steering wheel yet, Ted, and honestly, I don't want one because then I'd have to keep getting one. Truck I just got doesn't have heated seats, and I know I'm going to miss it. And so is Rachel. Rachel's going to be annoyed this winter when she figures out that it doesn't have heated seats. Like, but I don't want to pay for one that has leather. I'm like, the leather package comes with heated seats. She liked the last car because it had a heated seat for her. Yeah, a lot of people just aren't aware. But if you just help them understand what's going on, you sell better equipment that's oftentimes better sized with a better install. And what ends up happening to your overall install quality? I mean,
there's more money for better stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And you make more money and they're happier. Like, dude, none of this sucks. So what would you all say in the last year, what percentage of systems that you've sold were single stage? Reedy, you want to go first?
Probably 5%.
Okay. And what's the industry average?
I don't know, because I'm not concerned about that, but I would bet you it's a lot higher than that.
It's
Probably
about 85.
85.
Yeah, 85 to 90% is the single stage across the residential HVAC industry. So Tanner, what would you say last year of single stage percentage has been?
Probably about the same, 5%, 10% maybe. It tends to be either just single stage because we want the cheapest thing possible and we're not really concerned, or it's we are concerned, and then they end up getting 5-stage is kind of the norm, some type of inverter. And so I've actually never even sold any 2-stage or anything like that, just because if they're concerned with it, they typically fall inverter just because that's really your best bang for your buck.
Yeah, it's more or less the same price now anyway, right?
Pretty much.
Is that
So
how,
Ken, how
how
about
it's
you?
for you, Reedy? Okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
Sorry, Reedy, finish your thought, and then Ken.
I was just going to say yes. That is how it works out, because there's no reason 2-stage equipment costs almost as much as 5-stage, and when it comes down to it, there's so much more capability in the 5 than in the 2. Why do it?
And with supply chain, we're seeing less and less 2-stage heat pumps.
Yeah.
So
It's not that many out there. So Ken, in the last year or two, what would you say your single stage percentages?
20% or less.
20? Okay.
Yeah, there are those who are buying purely based on price. All they can afford is a basic system. But for anybody who's looking for comfort, they're going multi-stage.
Jeff?
saying that 5 to 10%, but again, it's usually lowest price rental properties, moving literally for sale sign out front.
Yep.
Not the ones that say they're moving for 5 years in a row before they make a decision.
Yeah, even the 5-year people are buying better stuff, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily a giant jump. I mean, you go from 11 grand to 15 to get something decent. It's not that huge of a spread when you're already spending upwards of 10 grand. It's not that it's nothing, but you aren't trying to sell 15, you're trying to sell 4 or 10 in general, unless you go and do a Jeff and sell a whole freaking duct system while you're at it. Punk. My average job doing full home performance was $28,600.
It was how many years ago though?
I know. That was 5 years ago. So all sorts of things have changed, but it's just wild that that sort of thing is happening. And what's the valuation on that house from the county?
Last Texas tax assessment was $38,000. Recently bought for $120 something.
Yeah, and it got a nearly $30,000 HVAC system. So with good education is fundamentally what's behind it all.
And allow them to make a decision.
Yes, and
That's the
not
biggest
coercion.
thing.
No coercion.
Yeah, no coercion. In fact, Jordan, you got a great comment here. HVAC sales is all about trust. If someone has not experienced the benefits from a properly designed system that is staged, they're hesitant. Yep. And he goes on.
Posted, yeah,
What's
Avi
that?
posted that thing today about Chat GPT's description of the Sandler selling system and HVAC.
Yeah. That's what we'll have to post that up at some point because that was pretty nice. I'll stick it in the group sometime soon. But consumer education, and this is heuristics. You're breaking things down. This is not rules of thumb. This is actually like well backed. But you do have to understand when you can use heuristics and when you can't, because sometimes there's a situation where it's not a good idea, and that does require some skill. But if we're going to do a lot of good systems, we have to somehow break things down so that newbies can succeed. I think you'd agree. Everybody else here would agree. And all of us were newbies at some point. And just kind of touching on the last week, and Abhi, if you've got something to jump in here, you're so eloquent on this stuff, and I'm not. But changing industry norms is really critical here. That's part of why I started talking about the badass HVAC system. This goes back to 2019, so it's been a little while. And this is meant to be simple so that even a newbie can get their head around it and do okay on selling the right stuff. Because a lot of HVAC salespeople now don't have an HVAC background. So how are they going to sell the right stuff? I mean, they're just not. They need help. They need a process. They need training. There's a whole lot of things, but oftentimes they don't get it. And then the rest of us as technicians show up, although I'm not actually a technician, but everyone here is a technician, and you show up when somebody sold the wrong system and you have to jam it in anyway. It's not going to go well. And you're going to be in that 47% that's above 0.7 static. That's not good. So how do we change norms? And one thing that I learned about a little while ago is litter in the United States used to be really normal. You just throw crap out your window. But it got to be enough of a problem that not that there should be a law. I always hate it when people say there should be a law. But littering is very expensive if you get caught doing it. And that ended up shifting the norm within the United States to where litter is a bad thing. Just throwing stuff out the window is a bad thing. So how can we begin to shift things like that within the HVAC industry? And we've been talking about some of that, having heuristics, some basic ways of looking at things that are still pretty close to technically correct, even if they're simplified. And these are a couple of things that we think are important for this general subject. So we talked about client education, really important. Offering the actual right system, offering multiple systems to clients so they can pick what the right one is for them. Keeping your static pressure as low as is reasonable and possible. And sometimes it's not going to be possible. 0.9 to 0.8. Is it fantastic? No, but he signed off on it and it's like for like. What are you going to do? There's limits. You do what you can. Evacuate below 200 microns, flow nitrogen, and charge properly to the length of the line set. Like these couple of things here really, really help. Are they perfect? No. But I think it's a decent list. And I know you think so because you helped me come up with it.
Yeah. And replacing the line set when possible too.
Yeah.
Not knowing what you have.
So, I mean, those are a couple different things about how do we begin to make it so that the average system isn't so freaking bad. So that when we're taking pictures out doing quotes or change outs, we don't take a before picture and just rip it to shreds because it's awful. How do we shift that? We talked last week, like standards aren't going to do it. There's some organizations that can help. So one thing we didn't get to last week is talking about organizations that can be helpful. Technical is really important to understand this and have your head around it. I mean, you need to understand static pressure, duct pressure fairly well. It's not that hard, but you probably do need a little bit of training on it. The refrigeration cycle, I couldn't get through my head until recently when I watched one of Bergman's videos. I'm like, oh, that's it. Okay, we're just converting phases. We're going from liquid to gas. And for some reason, it just hadn't clicked with me before. So having that technical training is important. And there's some orgs that are really good at that. So like National Comfort Institute, really good at that stuff. ESCO, really good at that stuff. RSCS,
yep.
Really good at that stuff. But the curse of the technical is it ultimately follows sales, because if the wrong system is sold, you can't install it right. It's impossible. Like it's as much fun as it is to shoehorn some giant V8 into a Prius or a Miata or something like that. That's not what you want to do with HVAC. You want to
so maybe technicians writing in Sharpie on the ductwork the date and the static pressure, because then it's not the technician. Like the key maybe is for people to be thinking about how they can make it not their fault if a bad decision is made. And since the technician's in the house, if he puts a static pressure in bold on that ductwork, then, at least when that equipment gets changed, he clearly avoided responsibility by letting people know what they were looking at.
Yeah, a good starting point is just measuring.
Yeah, measure.
Of just,
measuring correctly,
properly. If you're, an installer or whatever, and you're like, sure, everything you guys are saying is great and wonderful, but the people I work for do not care. Start taking the measurement. And then when you go back to office, say, hey, this equipment's rated for 0.5, but we were right at 1 inch. So what happens when we have to come back out in 3 years to replace this blower motor? If it's one thing to have an issue and everyone not acknowledge that it's there and just ignore it. It's another thing to actually acknowledge the problem and it still be there. At least then, hey, it's there. We know it's there, and something's more likely to be done if that's the case. It's the ignoring
and if it
everything's
isn't,
the problem.
You handed it off at least.
Yes.
You shifted that responsibility to the supervisor or whoever. Hey, we tested that out. It's 0.1. Yep. You going to do anything?
And as much as we advocate for not doing stuff for free, so always keep that in mind. It's like, be sure you're getting paid what you're worth. It is that is something like doing static pressure testing. I visited a job with Jeff today, and I chatted with the homeowner, and 3 minutes later, he's got his readings. He punched his holes. Well, excuse me, installed his test ports. David Richardson, yes, I have paid attention, of National Comfort Institute. But like 3 or 4 minutes, he had his numbers. Like, it's not a huge deal. And even if you just do it for your own curiosity and edification, just to learn and understand what's going on, you're going to find a bunch of screwed up systems. And it can be dangerous, though. Then that can leave you frustrated if your company does nothing about it. But part of the learning process is measuring stuff almost just for the sake and the love of measurement. You don't want to do it all the time, but if you do enough to start to get an idea of what's going on, that's part of the learning process.
Well, and part of our process is learning not to be the hero. It's learning to be the guide. And so if you're reporting back to the company and they do nothing, that shouldn't be frustrating to you unless you're in hero mode. Mm-hmm. Like if you're thinking more guide than you are a hero, you're thinking about responsibly avoiding responsibility and placing that responsibility where it belongs. And if you've done that, you should feel good. And so when you go back to the office and you say, hey, static on that system we just installed is 1 inch. Like if they do nothing, at least you cleared it off of your shoulders.
Yeah, you get to sleep good now.
You get to sleep good now.
Which that's important. And so, Jordan, type in where you're from, because you've got to be somewhere south, judging by your comment. But the biggest issues I find, Jordan says, I've an average 2 to 4 calls a day. Supply and return plenums don't get properly sealed. So if they're in an attic, yeah, that can be a real problem. A lot of companies should have sold new return plenums so things line up correct. I also find floats not wired correctly, systems not draining correctly, a lot of systems unleveled. That sounds like attic stuff to me. And I'm used to basements, being from the north. But these are all super common things that end up causing ugly failures, particularly if that drain pan overflows and messes up a ceiling. That can really suck.
You got
I've
a comment
seen-
on that, Jeff? Or go ahead, Tanner.
Everything he mentioned there, I've seen that all the time. I've seen one in particular instance of a unit where everyone that's wired up a secondary pan float switch knows what I'm talking about. How it'll have an extra wire for if you're going to wire up like an alarm or a light.
Mm-hmm.
This company wired the normally open relay for the alarm to the heat kit.
59-minute, huh?
I'm not going to say who I think it may be, but if I had to guess, there's probably out there in about 59 minutes.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and there's all of these things. I mean, Ken, you got a comment to make there, or
He was just laughing. I wanted to catch it.
you're just messing with them? Okay.
Yeah.
But this is actually one reason why I like the communicating equipment that's fully communicating, fully inverter, because it's just 4 wires to hook up. And so you don't have to worry about the dip switches. Who here has seen dip switches left in stock? You got like 4 tons of airflow on a 2-ton system or a 2.5-ton system. That's just normal. And one nice thing about the higher end systems is they may not commission themselves perfectly, but at least they commission themselves some. And that alone can help prevent some issues. Would you agree, or other comments?
Yeah, it's the same thing with your constant torque or your old PSCs that were always wired in high. Never set, never checked, never changed. So
Yeah, but they couldn't push enough air anyway, so who cares? They ended up being set right. It was just noisy.
True. That's a homeowner problem.
So Nate, to go back to your question about how do we change norms, right? I think it's useful to maybe begin by talking about who is the we we're talking about. Is it like the 6 of us here, or is it we as the nation, or we as the HVAC industry, or and I think the larger the scale you get to, the more, I guess, it's easy to slip into hero mode than it is to be in the guide mode. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. When you go to a grocery store, right, and you're standing there in the line, and you have like a couple of items, and you're thinking, wouldn't it be nice if someone just let me go ahead in front of the line, because they only have like bread and eggs. And that is the norm in some places, right? I've always if someone's behind me, they have a couple of items, so I'm like, well, you can go ahead. And how do you go about that being like like a national norm or a norm of a community? It's I think even just conceptualizing that question is filled with some kind of hubris. Like I alone have now decided, right, that this is the norm that everyone should aspire to. And it doesn't have to be that way. What you can do within, I think, the realm of, the lives of all the people that you influence and touch is that you can lead by example, live the kind of, norms and values that you would aspire other people to emulate, and then show them that this is a path that is successful and that is something that is desirable to do. And I think that's the, to go back to what Ted was saying, in about like uh, placing responsibility to where it is most best suited and located, and then, moving on. It's actually very ancient wisdom in some ways. Like in Eastern cultures, they say that it's not the expectation that brings you suffering, right? It's not your expectations and wants and needs that bring you suffering. It's your attachment to your expectations that brings you suffering. So in that sense, I think it's okay to feel like, hey, you know what? The norms of this industry need to change, and the industry and the homeowners and everyone would be better off if the norms had changed. I think it's okay to have that expectation. But if you attach yourself too much to it, if you feel like it is your duty and obligation to change the entire norms of the entire industry, and it's on you and you alone, and if it doesn't succeed, you will hate yourself or you'll be sad, or if it succeeds, you'll reward yourself. I think that's where it's easy to slip into hero mode. It's easy to slip into martyr mode, and I think it's best to stay away from that. And so to go back to what we were talking about is that what I think HVAC 2.0 can do is to demonstrate that this way of doing things is both desirable and profitable. And I think people will just follow.
I think we should close on that. That was so eloquent and beautiful. What are we going to do now?
Well, I have one more thought.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'll be like, I definitely, I hear the serenity prayer in there of understanding what you can change, what you can't. And fundamentally, the only thing that we can change is ourselves. We can influence others, but that's as much as we can do. But one of the other pieces of the puzzle here is I come from manufacturing. And if you want to do things well and consistently, you need a really solid freaking process. And I mean, not to point fingers or anything, but there may be a process with the name of it in the show that you're watching right now that's meant to help create a solid process that you can use. And that also is teachable to newbies, and that can help people understand the heuristics of when something might work and when something might, without them having to understand really, really deeply what's going on. It doesn't suck to learn it deeply, but if that's the requirements, it ain't going to scale. We're not going to get
right. And it's a repeatable process, so that you're doing the same thing over and over again. You know that you've checked the checklist of questions that you need to ask to responsibly help the homeowner and allow yourself and your company to responsibly avoid responsibility if the homeowner doesn't want to take that help.
Yep.
And that's the thing, is the repeatable process.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be as simple as just giving away those 2 videos before you show up at the house. That could be the beginning of your experience with it. The videos are on YouTube. Anybody can use them.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it begins with client education. We need technician education. We really need salesperson education. Really, like there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. But the
scary thing is the salesperson is almost the most important person in that whole chain. Like if the person with the least amount of knowledge gets things wrong, it doesn't matter what kind of rocket scientists come after.
Yeah. You can't fix that if it's not sold close enough to make okay. So yeah, the only real fix that doesn't involve a huge amount of hubris, like Hobby's talking about, and something that I can definitely struggle with personally, is you need to have a solid, repeatable, teachable process. And without that, it's just not going to happen. Everybody's going to slide back to what they're used to doing, which is going to be a really bad install. And a lot of that, again, isn't the fault of the technician who's putting it in. It's really the fault of the salesperson in selling the wrong piece of equipment.
Yeah, the finger pointing game of, oh my gosh, it's the equipment's fault, or oh my gosh, it's what.
Yeah, you put 4 tons of system on 2 tons of ductwork. That's not going to end well.
Yeah, blame it on the manufacturer.
Oh yeah, oh man, they make crap these days.
Yeah.
And the last couple of years, there's some fairness to that. We've had some COVID quality issues, but I mean, they've also been scrambling just to try and keep things going. So we have to give them some grace for that. But yeah, it's not all the manufacturer, it's not all the technician, but like all of these things need to be dealt with simultaneously and repeatably and at scale before it changes. Otherwise, we're going to continue with 93% bad installs. So maybe not the world's sunniest piece to end on, but this is possible. Like all change starts small with a few people really pulling in the same direction. You're seeing one of those groups here. This is
pressure, baby.
Yep.
Static pressure.
Yeah. Start with that. That's enough to get a really good start. That's a good heuristic and a good thing to offer to clients, and make sure that you document that you offer it and they decline. And if you want a hand with that, well, HVAC 2.0 accounts are $6 a month and $10 a report for the free quotes. So it is not a big lift to begin doing that right now. And with that, anybody else got any closing thoughts? It's kind of funny. We really should have ended with Abhi, because he's just like, dude, you should be president, except for you immigrated and you live in Canada.
Say something, Abhi. Say something smart.
All right. I got another story for you guys.
Great. We got a story.
Yes.
Good ending.
We can end on this. So there's renos going on in my house, by the way, so don't mind the background. So I moved to Michigan from India to go to school, and my first week there, I took the bus. I didn't have a car when I moved there, and so when I got on the bus, I sat down in some seat, and then it stopped by like one of those retirement places, and then a senior got on the bus, and then I just instinctively just stood up, because that's what I'm used to. That was the norm where I grew up in India, was to that regardless of whether you're sitting in like handicap seats or not, you just give your seat to someone who's a senior, right? And I remember I got yelled at by that lady. She said, "Young man, do I look like I need help?" and so I'll be honest, I can admit this. I was a little butthurt about that. I was like, what the heck, man? I didn't say this to her, but I was thinking in my head, like, what the heck, right? I'm trying to be a nice guy here. I'm trying to do the right thing, right? This is like, and why does she have to be so upset? She could just choose to ignore me. And then I realized, like, that's the distinction, right, between like expectations and being attached to your expectations. So I mean, my expectation that if when I got up that she would sit down is a normal expectation to have, right? And because that's what the culture I grew up in, or whatever, or the norms that I'm used to. But to think that my act would be rewarded with like gratefulness, and that she would be like, "Oh, young man, what a shining example you are," and all that stuff, that's hubris. And so what I resolved to do was to not let that lady, and maybe she was having a bad day, who knows, right? Not let that lady and her attitude affect how the kind of norms that I would hold myself by. And so even till today, and if and when I do take the bus somewhere or public transport somewhere, whatever, if I have to, I'll get up, because that's who I am, and I don't want anyone to cramp my style, and that is my norm, and I'm sticking by it, regardless of I'm not attached to the expectations that come from holding on to that norm. And maybe that's the distinction that we need to draw here, Nate, with how to move forward, is to live life on your terms, and try to lead by example and show people what the right way to do is, and then leave them at it.
Yeah, see, Abhi, he actually told me this story before, but the party's leaving out. He actually followed that lady home and beat her with a stick afterwards. It's pretty brutal. But
now you're going to be appreciative when somebody gets into the other seat.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.
Now that your kneecap.
This is America. That's why I support it. Beat her with a stick.
I did no such thing.
Abby's going to get fired tomorrow.
Speaking for the whole
I'm sorry,
tribe,
I'm Al
Abby,
from
we love you.
Kentucky.
Truly.
You're
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And now everybody who's watching, you see why Abby's around, because he's really kind of our elder statesman.
Yeah, he's
he's the
younger than
father.
me. Other than
Yeah, you're right. Abby's almost the punk here, aside from Tanner. Anyway, well, thank you all for coming. And next week, I'm sure everybody will be shocked. We're planning to talk about dehumidification. We seem to have a thing. Again, dude. Again, you know, it's your fault. You posted the freaking graphic.
Oh, sorry.
It's your fault. I told you that's what we're going to do.
My fault.
It's, you know, well, or mine, whatever. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about next week. And if you have any other comments or questions, if you're on Facebook, the HVAC 2.0 Advanced Discussion Group, please go join there. Of course, click subscribe and the bell and all that good stuff here so that you get notified. There we go. Yes, I know. We're going to be hearing a little bit about reheat, I'm sure, next week, but probably going to be more of a discussion of standards and requirements, frankly. But anyway, thank you all for coming, and thank you to the gang here for coming tonight too. And if you have any comments or questions, reach out. My email is nate@hvac20.com. And we'll see you all next week, unless anybody else has something else.
The rest of you guys to the after party.
Off to the after party.
See y'all.
Bye.
Night all.